programs, and obviously I can tell the CBC. Hi, Kathy from CBC. It's a matter of form.
What made these programs, these 5 that you offered the money to, what made them stand out and, in government funding terms, worthy?
Well, look, FedNor places a particular emphasis on job creation. Part of that process is developing capacity. Part of that problem is leveraging, or challenge is leveraging. And all of these, and the other part is building capacity. These organizations are best suited for that. They've demonstrated real success. Obviously, Anishinaabe Development Fund in particular has been a flagship CFDC that serves one of the largest areas in the country with all of its isolated and remote communities, and I pay careful attention to it given my own background. So we're very pleased with the work that they do. Obviously, at least one of the announcements was focused more squarely on the important data gathering and analysis work that Lakehead does. In the forest sector, as we see it rebound, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate tools to make good decisions as a government, as partners with our provincial government, the Ministry of Natural Resources, and the private sector. I've often said, as we see the forest sector rebound, we have to make sure it's rebounding for the right reasons. That means making strategic investments in innovation, and that demands good data analysis, which is the thrust of the announcement today for Lakehead. So all of these, as you can see, in some way, shape, or form are put a particular focus on job creation, the capacity for businesses to thrive, and that's what FedNor specializes in.
Why are you particularly interested in the forestry industry?
Well, because we're seeing it rebound. We want it to rebound out in northwestern Ontario and across northern Ontario for the right reasons. Historically, some of the solar mill sites in the region have closed down when the strength of our dollar is at par or better than the US dollar. And we don't think that's a great way to make a comparison or for the fortunes of those smaller mills to rise and fall on. Obviously, we've made investments in some of the larger mills across northern Ontario, here in Thunder Bay and in Dryden, and we appreciate the success that they're having, but it's still a very fragile environment, this sector. Highly competitive, very tight margins. So as I said before, the forest sector is on the rebound, but we need to see it grow for the right reasons, not a 90-cent dollar.
What are the right and wrong reasons for that growth then?
Well, the right reasons are because we're investing in innovation, we're investing in new capacities and human resources in our First Nations communities. I obviously mentioned the relationship that we have with the Ministry of Natural Resources. Some of our funding announced today is in full cooperation with them because they're overseeing what I think is a key and important development in sustainable forestry management and First Nations managing those forests with those licenses. So their relationship with very large corporations, the Domtars and the Resolutes of the world, means having capacity. So if we can provide data analysis support or capacity for programs that strengthen their position in the process, then that's what's going to make this another key part of the forest sector rebound for the right reasons.
Almost $1 million to the Anishinaabe Nation Development Fund. What do you expect from that money?
I expect them to continue to place a particular emphasis on small and medium-sized businesses that have an opportunity to thrive in isolated and remote First Nations communities. Obviously, part of the success of Ring of Fire communities has been funds earmarked specifically for that. Anishinaabe Development Fund is on the ground, particularly sensitive to real opportunities, and they're always capable of showing that they're delivering real results for those communities. And so this funding obviously represents a continued opportunity to build on those successes. Any other questions?
You can't go through an entire interview and not talk about the Ring of Fire. What's happening in mining with the Ring of Fire?
Yeah, so I felt, I was at the Energy and Mining Ministers Conference in Sudbury last week, as most of you folks know, and I felt like, in particular, my discussions with the two Ontario ministers could be characterized as generally positive. I was a little disheartened to see that the Development Corporation has yet to produce supporting policy documents for consumption of its key, or by its key partners. That would be the federal government and our First Nations communities, and importantly the private sector. And in the announcement that the board members would be constituted by senior bureaucrats from the provincial government, I don't think fairly reflects the substantive involvement that First Nations communities and federal governments and private sector stakeholders would potentially have in a development corporation. So I think we're going to have to work through that announcement with a little bit more details, and Minister Gravel has communicated to me a strong desire to open the lines of communications a little bit more effectively on what's happening with respect to the development corporation, to make it, frankly, a little bit more appetizing than it currently is from where I'm standing.
So government's not ready to jump in yet?
Our government has already jumped in. We're in deep on community development in the First Nations communities and foundational academic pieces at Confederation College. An uptake of more than 90% success rate for students who are getting training related to the Ring of Fire. So obviously, in some of today's announcements reflect an ongoing commitment to that. Our priority moving forward, and we've been clear on this since 2013, is to make the right investments, so make the right decisions about the right investments on particular projects that accomplish two things. One, they are focused on the development of the proposed extractive sites for the Ring of Fire, as unclear as that is right now. And two, they align with superordinate goals like electrification and road access to isolated remote communities. We haven't seen that yet, frankly, from the provincial government, but I'm confident, based on my recent discussions with Minister Gravel, that we're going to see a more focused and disciplined exercise on specific projects that can move the chains and get First Nations communities and a little more clarity for cities in the southern part of this region to understand how and what role they could play in the development of Ring of Fire overall.
Is it the minister who's helping make it happen, or do you think there's some political involvement higher up in the Ontario government?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak on behalf of how the provincial government does its work. All I can say is that I continue to have meaningful discussions with Minister Gravel. As I said earlier, I'm concerned that whether it's board membership on a not-for-profit development corporation or the process in general, we still have obviously some challenges around own source revenue, and the landmine commissioner's decision is still in play, and these are squarely things the province has to deal with. They're making some progress. That's the good news. I think the important next step is to sit down with them and the private sector and the First Nations communities, single out a project or two, get it into the Build Canada Fund, and move forward with this legacy resource development project. Any other questions?
Just to switch gears here, talk about Kenora and their 4 lane highways. Recently, the mayor has suggested maybe changing the location because of the development issues over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an expression of the level of frustration that Mayor Canfield and I have on this file. Frankly, considerable resources were committed to a twinning of the highway from the Manitoba border heading east. The first 14 kilometers of it, the funding has been parked in the Secretariat's office of the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario. And so far there's been an outright failure for them to move forward. In fairness to the province, obviously there were certain demands being placed on that that perhaps made it too difficult or even unreasonable. But I understand some of those issues are being addressed. I know the chief of Shoal Lake 39 personally, and I think she's a good person to work with. But we want to move this forward. Every single winter, people lose their lives, and Canada's road that connects the east to west is shut down for extended periods of time, hampering economic capacity and changing the decision making of major transport companies and or their products. So we want to move this forward. I've made a commitment to reach out to the new Minister of Transportation for Ontario in short order to understand what steps can be taken to move this project forward. But so far, I think Mayor Canfield's comments simply reflect the frustration we have with this file.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Some of your names, and obviously I can